WhatsApp number is 0809 4440981. You can also tweet at Smooth981 and catch the live stream up on our YouTube channel as well. Just search for Smooth981. You can catch the live stream, subscribe, and post a comment as well. Our analysts this morning, Uade and Chibuzor. Good morning.
Good morning, Chibuzor.
Good morning.
Great to see you. Good morning,
Good
Zibby.
morning, Uade.
Lagos.
Good morning, Zibby.
Good
morning,
morning.
Lagos.
All right. Very, very nice to have you back, Chibuzor. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so let's start with this article. And we're going to start off with an article that comes from The Punch. So, Wadi, we're going to start with you. Now, governors-elect protest as outgoing governors shun transition panel.
Wow. You know, I reading the story, and it's a bit amazing that you have and everybody continues to blame the center. You have a center that is doing a transition, that celebrated the handover of the transition document, and then you have states who. But first of all, let me give credit to Abia State. The governor and the governor-elect did a good job. They handed over the committees worked together, handed over a transition document for him to work with. But we're talking about Governor of Zamfara State, Matawale. The same Matawale who is asking that the head of EFCC should be arrested. And it's amazing that you are refusing to work with the incoming governor. I really don't know why. And but the truth for me is, when there is a transition in government, both sides must sit together and understand what is on ground, what is being done, what has been done, so that you don't come in and everybody now has to start looking for what happened, what didn't happen. You have to start chasing the pansexs in the ministries because you can't get anybody telling you that this is what they did. You don't have proper handover summaries that would give the governor an idea of where we are, things that have been completed, things that are ongoing, things that have been planned, and ongoing discussions have started, so that you can actually move forward. Like I always say, governance is a continuum. If you have done your 8 years and you're moving out, or you lost an election and you couldn't get a re-election, that doesn't mean that you're not going to work with the incoming person, irrespective of how you feel, how bad you feel, how good you feel. It's about you remembering that you are in charge of the state. You are meant to collaborate with the incoming person so that the person can have an idea of what's going on. And then it's easy for the incoming executive to be able to hit the ground running. If these allegations are true, it's quite disappointing that someone who is calling and shouting about fraud and corruption is not talking about proper handover, which is due process. The first thing for me that you would make everybody believe, or seem to believe, that at least you did your job, is when you do a proper handover. It's the same way. When you're going on vacation, you should hand over properly to the next person, so that the person has an idea of what you're doing, what you want to do. When you're leaving an organization or you're leaving a place, you're meant to do a proper handover. And if he hasn't done this, and you're letting the incoming person now have to chase after. And let's also remember that until May 29, you're still the chief executive. Nobody has the right to give out documentations once you don't approve them. And that's the reason why both parties sit together, agree what is on ground, and then they can move forward, having a document that everybody can say, okay, for prosperity's sake, that this is what was done.
All right, the WhatsApp number 0809 4440981 from Daily Trust. Now, experts and stakeholders in critical sectors of the country have sort of set an agenda for the incoming administration, and they've highlighted some areas that certainly need some urgent attention: security, economy, power, infrastructure, health, education, and agriculture.
So so what I saw that in the story, you talk about some sectors of the economy that require the incoming government attention, and I wanted to strike out the sum because it doesn't look like some, it's like all sectors, because I'm not sure they missed out anything here. Maybe sports is not here, but sports is also critical to our development, especially of the youth.
Education.
So basically, let's call it as it is. Education is here. They talk about ASU strikes. So let's call it as it is. Whichever government, and we have an incoming government that's supposed to resume on the 29th of May, and I would have said this months or even a year ago, whichever government is coming into power May 29. But now we have someone who's coming in specifically at the end of the last elections, pending whatever comes out of the tribunals, is going to be tasked with doing a lot of things. Is going to be tasked with looking at the economy that does not seem to be in the right direction, and to all intents and purposes is not in the moving in the right direction and needs to be course corrected. Is going to be able to have to look at an inflation rate that has officially hit 22 point something percent, going to 23%, although most other Nigerians will tell you that the rates are far more than that on the streets. Is going to look at our dual currency environment, our dual exchange rate environment, and try to put a streamline of it. He's going to have to look at the fact that we cannot even source for higher requirements for foreign exchange. And that in itself is not a standalone problem. It's tied to the fact that we do a lot of importation and we produce very little. So obviously that looks into what our industrial processes. Are we able to manufacture? What are we able to manufacture? So there are a lot of things to look at. Security also is one big thing, because our inability to secure our country, or the inability of the government to be able to secure the entire country, is a big limitation on a lot of things that is happening in the country today, from agriculture down to tourism, down to investments, even from our members of our own diaspora who are afraid to come back home to put their money where their mouth is. So we need to look at a lot of these things. The incoming government is tasked with a lot of things. Already, the outgoing government is going to hand them a nice envelope of to-do lists, which they've kicked forward, such as the subsidy removals. We look at the power sector and the right pricing of power. You look at the dual currency exchange, which somebody has to tackle at some point. So I don't envy the incoming government, and I don't envy how they are going to have to relate with Nigerians, because on the surface, a lot of these things are going to call for drastic actions. And the challenge with drastic actions is that you're going to already stress a Nigerian populace that is already strained to their fullest extent financially, with having to deal with inflation, having to deal with increased costs of everything, having to deal with being able to live. Then there are also the trade unions who this current government and government before them have kicked their issues obviously forward, and will now be made by this new government, because I expect the likes of ASU, the NLC, and even the doctors and every other person when any of the acronyms to step up and come out with their demands, maybe 2 months or a month after the new government settles in, because they want to hit them quickly and fresh. So we have a lot of issues. Obviously, that we also have our increased debt profile. One of the things that this government the outgoing government has done well, in quote, is that they have managed to increase the debt profile of the country in trying to build infrastructure. Now we can look at it from a lot of points. The defenders of the government or the supporters of this government would say, hey, we needed to get those infrastructure on ground. And I don't disagree. We need to get a lot of the infrastructure on ground. We need to improve our infrastructure. But two questions I always ask about the way we provide infrastructure in Nigeria is that, what's the pricing of the infrastructure? What has the cost? How much has this infrastructure cost Nigerians? Then we also need to look at the basics. Well, some of our problems are the fundamentals. And it's not going to end with this outgoing government. The incoming government also needs to look at it. For every one of those contracts that have gone out, every one of them, there are very few contracts that have come out in the country in the last few years that Nigerians can look at the numbers that are given out and say, hey, you know what, these things were priced properly. We have a system that inflates contracts, which means it inflates costs, which means in the future it inflates the debts that the people of Nigeria and the future generations have to pay for. So we need to look at the point where, as we go on to carry out some of these projects and to either to build whatever infrastructure, because we still have a large infrastructure deficit. And it'll be interesting to see how this new government takes it. How do we fund these things without overinflating those costs? How do we fund strategic projects? How do we sort out the issue of subsidy? Because subsidy, the issue of petroleum and the cost of petroleum, because it's not just about removing subsidy, there are other side issues to it. How do they buffer the impact of having some of these economic decisions that they're going to have to take? And I don't think the distribution of 5,000 naira to households is going to solve anything. We saw how it worked at the end of COVID. We've seen how it's worked going forward. They have appeared to be just be endless, bottomless pits for money to leave the system. And we need to sort it out. We need to tell ourselves the truth. And I think that's also a problem that Nigerian citizens need to accept, or statement that while we are a potentially rich country, we are not a rich country. Our politicians have to get our heads out of that thought process, and our people also need to get ourselves out of that thought process. That once we get to that point, I think it will also liberate us and able to look at the governments and both the politicians and the people and understand that, hey, we need to have a lot of work that needs to happen. So saying some sectors, I disagree. I think every sector needs help. But obviously the government needs to prioritize and say, you know what, this is what I want to look at to start off with. These are things we need to settle and stabilize. How do we keep running our system that where we need Forex every month and we're not earning as much as we used to earn? How do we block the oil theft that has been happening? You know, the NNPC and this current government has become a reporting arm. They just report how much we lose to oil. We haven't seen any oil theft, we haven't seen any steps to stop it. Security is an ongoing process. Some of these things are so fundamental for our future existence as a country. Before we start looking at other issues about even how do we stay together as a country, how do we work progressively. So I do not envy the incoming government. There's a lot of work to be done. And yes, I don't think it's just some sectors. I think it's all sectors. But let's start with something. We trying to do everything at once also is also the pitfall of most governments. If they focus on one or two things, and Nigerians see appreciable, Nigerians sees that there's appreciable work being done, then there's trust being built with the government because, hey, you know, there's the euphoria of winning an election and there's actual work. We saw the euphoria with the previous last two governments. It lasted for some months after the elections, after they were sworn in, and it was lost after a period of time when people did not see the fruits of democracy that they've invested into one way or the other. So for everybody who has voted or not voted for an incoming government, at the start of May 29, as long as they are the ones in charge, we all need to get behind them one way or the other and make sure that it works for us.
All right, let's move on to Punch. The understate governor, Rotimi Akeredolu, has called on the president-elect to take the issue of power devolution seriously in his administration for a fast-track development of Nigeria. Now, he reiterated that the power at the central level was too overwhelming and needed to be devolved to the state.
And I think I totally agree with him. He's been at the forefront of pushing for what a number of people are calling restructuring of how the federal government operates. The center is too heavy. All the money is coming to the center, and then the states are going to beg. At the end of the day, some states who are generating much more than they require are the ones who, at the end of the day, you know, have to manage because there's a sharing formula that goes with everything. But the truth of it is that we've said it a number of times, some states are not qualified to be called states. Internally generated revenue is almost zero. We were talking about Zamfara State now. Someone pointed out it's the poorest state in the country. Poverty rate of I think about 92-93%. Lack of infrastructure and so on and so forth. And it just goes to speak to why in my own opinion, and I think the states haven't been fighting for it enough. Why there's a need for them to have a real constitutional review that will change the way the center operates really along with the state. Let's start to hold the governors accountable, because every time we call the central government, 36 states are also calling them, including the Federal Capital Territory. So when I know that there's enough money being generated in the particular state where I reside, then it is easier for us to, call the governor and let them be accountable and responsible for those monies that are coming in, rather than saying, well, we're waiting for the federal government to share the allocation. Last month, the allocation share dropped. It dropped from 800 and something to 600 and something billion. And that's the reality. States that really cannot manage, yes, we would require some assistance from the federal government. But at that point in time, the populace who go out to vote, who go out to elect a leader in the state, would actually start to look at what their programs are, how much money are they going to put into infrastructure, How do they want to build areas? How do they want to tackle security? How do you want to tackle areas relating to health, education, housing? And these are the realities that we face. We can't continually wait for federal government to bail out. At the beginning of the last administration in 2015, all the states were bailed out with 400 and something billion. Till today, nobody has paid back that money. It was like, oh, you just dash them the money and nothing. We don't know what they were used for. We don't know what it went into. We've seen the COVID monies that were returned. I think Chibuzor and I laughed at it the last time when they were telling some states, some states were collecting so much money as refunds and you can't see them. So I think that there's a need for the center to reduce its power, focus on infrastructure that would connect the activities of the state, so that it can make things like logistics that we'll continue to talk about in agriculture, trains and stuff like that, and leave the day-to-day activities within the state so that they can actually become accountable for what they're doing. And some of the things Chibuzor mentioned are the things that Kerry is talking about.
So I'd like to chip in a bit of, sorry, I'd like to chip in a bit of this. So one of my challenges with the government, and I know that Lakunle is somewhere around, and we've actually had this discussion a while back about how much power the states actually really have and which they are not using. But one of my challenges about some of the governors speaking about devolution of power is that what they are looking for in essence is not devolution of powers. They want increased, they are looking at the sharing formula, basically. They want more to go to the states. They are not looking about the responsibilities with themselves, having to actually grow their idea. Because if you talk about states like Zamfara, which you mentioned, Zamfara has some of the richest deposits of gold in Nigeria. And there are tales about how some of this gold is being leaving the country, but you struggle to see how Zamfara is not even able to generate any revenue or useful revenue to be able to make things work within the state. But she also pointed out the clear thing that it also sits in the hand of the populace. If the states are allowed to have that level of responsibility and the populace know that is happening within the state, then maybe somehow they would hold their people a bit more accountable. Maybe somehow when they go to vote on the days of elections, they wouldn't vote because the guy is coming from their particular local government, or the guy comes from he shares the same religion, or the guy's name sounds nice, or he comes from a historically good family. They would now start looking at the facts and the figures. How will this guy's presence in government increase or improve my living standards? Maybe that's what needs to happen in this country.
All right, let's go on to some messages coming through via WhatsApp. Victor says, Zamfara State is perhaps the poorest in Nigeria with a lot of gold. The government at all levels should try and create a commonwealth for all. According to the National Social Registry, Zamfara has the most poor people in Nigeria. Okay, and Ajayi says, the most important agenda the incoming government must deal with is to restructure the administration so that every tier of government must have a clearly defined role in the economic, social, and security affairs of the country. Power must be devolved to the state and local government for the country to be run as a true federation. And let's go on to this message from Joseph. Joseph says, I hope all the relevant agencies like the ICPC, the EFCC are awake their responsibilities, because the last minute loans projects and all are very alarming. I fear that some leaders may want to reap some benefit before leaving office. You're listening to Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1. Stay with us, the show continues.
We can talk.
Yes.
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube as well.
No, but Chibuzor, the truth of it, for me, is those clamoring for, let's rejig the allocation formula are the ones who don't want to do any work. The ones who
they don't want any work.
The ones who are truly clamoring for restructuring are the ones who know that they can generate the IGR and they can put it into better use in their states.
Yes.
To be fair to Akeredolu, is one person that has continually screamed about this. He screamed about it under the last administration. He's screaming about it again. And the truth of it is that, to a large extent, because I do know a bit about it, is he has really increased the internally generated revenues of those states. Do you get?
Yeah, so I'm not critical of the likes of Akeredolu. I think the people I was most critical at some point were the current people in power. Yeah.
You're listening to Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1 That's the number to send your WhatsApp messages to. Our analysts this morning, Chibuzor and Uade. Let's move on to Daily Trust. Now, the governor of the CBN, Godwin Emefiele, has disclosed that the president of the Dangote Group has started repaying some of the loans used in financing the refinery, the Dangote refinery, and petrochemicals.
Okay, yippee. We got the good news. He started repaying, He was expected, I assume he was expected, it was expected at some point to repay the Dangote refinery was expected to repay some of those funds. So yeah, the central bank governor is telling us the repayments have already started. So I'm not sure where the news is, because I think, unfortunately, because of it's like like that tale about dog eat dog and man eat dog kind of thing. When somebody takes a loan, he's expected to repay. If he's repaying ahead of schedule, there are reasons why he's repaying ahead of schedule. Like that, he wants to take new financing. He wants to get out of his books because he wants to take financing from somebody else. And he doesn't want to spoil his credit. But it's good to know, and maybe it's just good for every other person, every other young person who's also into business to see that at least loans are meant to be repaid. That for me is the long and short of the story. But yeah, the bigger story is that the refinery is online. I hear that they've promised, Alhaji has promised that by June, which is not too long away from now, we'll be getting the first barrels will process the product will be rolling off that production line, and we'll be able to get it in consumption in the various markets. So it's something good to know. This current government has tied a lot of Nigeria's future hopes to the existence of that refinery. There are a lot of things tied to it, and it's good to see that. And we are all hoping, and with bated breath, to see that what has been promised actually is what happens. I have my challenges and questions with a lot of the things that are coming out of the refinery, but also for me, if you look at the microeconomy and the macroeconomic part, the fact that we have a refinery that is at least is creating more jobs for a lot of Nigerians, creating more skilled jobs for a lot of Nigerians, potentially might reduce our forex needs for importation of fuel. Might also give Nigerians the reality about the fact that even if you build more refineries, it's not a silver bullet to solving our petroleum dependency or pricing of petroleum dependency issue, because I do assume and I expect that Alhaji's refinery will be charging market price for whatever product is rolling out at bench. If not, Alhaji will look for markets that will pay him the right price to get those products. So we need to give a clap. I think my only pet peeve with this is that the way the central bank governor was busy announcing it at the program, as if he was in charge of the PR for the organization. I think the central bank should be bigger than this. That's my own pet peeve. But hey, it's good to know. It's good to see all the numbers that were taken and what the investment was, and it's large investment. So one thing about the Dangote industry is that they're heavily invested into Nigeria and ensure that Nigeria keeps working for their future progress and also their future profit. So it's good to see that this is happening already. And I hope that, we are able to also make the central bank, through the banks, are able to make funds more freely available for other people who are going to go into businesses and be able to give out the value at the right pricing. So it's good to see. I don't think I need to say much about this, really. The loan is being paid. So we'll track the rest of the money when the central bank governor announces it later. Thank you.
Tunde via WhatsApp says much still needs to be done in the petroleum sector, including reduction of theft. But this administration has tried towards the twilight of its tenure. Some achievements have been recorded. The new government has to continue. Idima Puza says the best answer to the moribund refineries is selling them off to private hands to manage if we want good competition for the petroleum industry in Nigeria. And Pastor Dapo says, like the analyst reiterated, all and not some sectors have been visited by the incoming administration. However, it has to follow a step-by-step process, and prioritizing will be a wise idea because a jack of all trades invariably becomes the master of none. And let's go on to this story coming from Vanguard. The federal government says more investment is needed to support the over 4 million people experiencing hunger and malnutrition in the Northeast.
I read the story. Unfortunately, it is true, but they're looking at about between 4 to 6 million people, and they're looking at about 1.3 billion. I think it was 1.3 billion. Let me just quickly check that, to mobilize about 391 million immediately. You know, $391 million immediately towards getting the inputs for farming, towards ensuring that those things can quickly be done. But they will be requiring, I think, about 1.3 billion in total towards ensuring that they don't go into a crisis period that could lead to starvation of about 2.3 million children. But the fact of the matter is, across Nigeria, we have about 153 million Nigerians who are poor, below the poverty line, much more below the poverty index. And it is the same thing. Yes, there's been a lot of displacement in the northeast, unfortunately due to Boko Haram, but we've seen more and more terror acts across the country to ensure that, one, food security is really not going to be an issue. The logistics for moving a number of those things, the flooding that happened last year, we can see the rains coming down again this year. And it's just unfortunate that it's the same cycle every year. Every year we go out, cap in hand. These are things that the incoming government, I think was one of the areas Chibuzor mentioned at the beginning. Agriculture is not just the planting or the farming, it's the logistics. How does it get to those who are going to pay for it? How do you ensure that the cost of getting it and the wastage that comes about from the excesses or the ones that come out and wasted, that lose value at the end of the day? So it's important that we do that. But I guess they're speaking to the incoming administration that they should prepare their minds for an immediate bill of about $391 million. Where are they going to get it from? Borrow? I don't know.
All right, on to the Daily Trust. The NSCDC has created a special squad to protect schools across the country against attacks.
Okay, this is from the Commandant General of the NSCDC, August at the top, who have created the squad. What they've done is they've collapsed the rapid response squad of the NSCDC and the female squad, and they've collapsed them into a single squad, which should be in charge of they call it the Safe School Special Response Squad, which is in charge of, it's an armed unit, and it's of the National Safe School Response Coordination Center, which is in compliance with the implementation strategy of the National Safe School Program. Plenty of organizations, plenty of acronyms. But let's down to the work. Now, obviously, in the last 10 years or more in Nigeria, one of the soft targets by insurgents, by militant groups have been schools, especially that parts of the north where the schools are on the outskirts of town, maybe separated from the settlements. They've been basically soft targets from the Chibok down to most of the places where we've had attacks on students. They basically have access to the schools, taking the students and out of this. So I think this is one of the steps that the NSCDC have tried to jump into to try to provide some additional security. Now, obviously I know that this is an action, obviously, and this is not a silver bullet that's going to solve all the problems. The overlying problem is able to sort out the security issue generally across the country. But hey, whichever action, like they said, little drops of water make a mighty ocean. Whatever actions they are taking, as long as they're taken properly, and I hope they are coordinated with other security organizations, will help in making schools safer, especially outside the big cities, because we are also seeing an incident. Uade just spoke about the poverty level and children, out of school children and hunger. We are seeing a lot of children who are not going to school, not largely partly because of security issues. Then obviously there are things like hunger, the ability to provide for them economically. We're having a larger number. And for me, it's a bigger concern because we're not talking about the now, we're talking about the impact in the next couple of years and in the future for the country. So we need to sort that out. So whatever steps are being happening, and thanks to the NSCDC for adding this, we hope it works well and we hope it fulfills whatever purpose it's supposed to fulfill. So let's leave it at that and keep watching.
All right, well, that's all the time that we have for Freshly Pressed this morning. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sending your messages through. And of course, special thanks to our analysts, Uade and Chibuzor, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us on the station.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lagos, for having us.
Do stay with us. There is a lot more to come on the Smooth Breakfast.
Bye.
Thank you,
Are
Chibuzor.
you still
Yeah,
there?
thanks, Zibby.
Yeah, okay, do you want to talk to Chibuzor?
Yeah, I want to talk to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Are you still there? I think they shut down the. Don't mind.